Tonight we welcome back Dan Ariely. He's on the line from Durham, North Carolina. Dan is a professor of behavioral economics at Duke University, and we spent the better part of this week discussing behavioral economics and how an awareness of our irrationality can improve healthcare and education. Well, tonight we're going to look at the connection between behavioral economics and crime. Okay, Dan, I want to start off by exploring something you wrote on your blog some time ago. Here's what you wrote. You said, "There is a certain perverse pleasure in contemplating the perfect crime." What is it about our character that attracts us to crime?
Well, I think there's kind of a few things to say about crime. And the perfect crime, by the way, is a strange thing, right? When people think about the perfect crime, there's usually not an individual that is suffering in that crime. The perfect crime is kind of a bank heist or some scam in Wall Street. It's something that you don't get anybody specific to suffer. And I think when people think about it, it's about how smart you are. It's taking away the human suffering that crime is creating, and it's basically getting people to think about how clever they are and can they outsmart other people. Kind of think about a train robbery from many years ago. It basically is, can you outsmart those people? And that's the pleasure that comes from it.
Well, tell me some examples from your research that show that people are just slightly dishonest, because we're not wholeheartedly dishonest, we're just slightly dishonest, as you say.
That's right. So it turns out that when you look at people, there's some people who cheat a lot, but most people cheat very little, and most people feel comfortable cheating very little. And here is how it works. Imagine I gave you a sheet of paper with 20 simple math problems, and I said you have 5 minutes to solve as many of those as you can. I'll give you $1 per question. Go. You finish, you work as hard as you can, you finish, I say please stop, put your pencil down, take the sheet of paper and count how many questions you got correctly. And now take this sheet, go to the back of the room and shred it. And then come back and tell me how many questions you got correctly, and I'll pay you accordingly. People do that, and we find out how much people report. What people don't know is that we play with the shredder. And the way we play with the shredder is it only shreds the sides of the page, but the full page is actually complete, so we can jump into this shredder and we can find out how many questions people actually answered. What we find is that people on average solve 4 problems, but report to be solving 6. And again, it's not that there's a few bad apples who cheat a lot. Instead, what we find is that lots and lots of people are willing to cheat a little bit and still feel good about it. And the question is why? And what we find out is that people are trying to balance 2 things. We're trying to feel good about ourselves. We're trying to feel that we're honest, wonderful, admirable people. At the same time, we want to benefit from cheating. Now you could say, how could you do both? You're either honorable or you benefit from cheating. Well, it turns out as long as we cheat just a little bit, we can do both. We can cheat a little bit and benefit from it, and we can still view ourselves as honorable people. Now the most interesting things about it is that what changes cheating behavior is actually what changes this fudge factor. What gets people to be more comfortable with exaggerating and less comfortable with exaggerating? So I'll give you a couple of examples. So how do you get people to feel less comfortable with exaggeration? So the idea for this first experiment came to us from a little joke. And the joke is that a guy goes to the rabbi. This is the Jewish version. You could do whatever version you want. The guy goes to a rabbi. He said, "Rabbi, you wouldn't believe what happened to me. Last week, I was here in synagogue and somebody stole my bicycle from synagogue." And the rabbi said, "This is terrible, this is awful, I can't believe this is happening. Here is what you do. Next week, come to synagogue and sit in the front row. And when we go over the 10 commandments, turn around and look at people in the eyes. And when we get to thou shalt not steal, see who can't look you in the eyes, you'll know that's your thief." Okay, the guy is very excited, the rabbi is excited, he comes to synagogue next week, sits in the front row, turns around, looks at everybody as they recite the 10 commandments, and the rabbi comes to him after the synagogue and says, "So how was it? Did it work? Did this trick work?" And the guy said, "Rabbi, you wouldn't believe it. It worked like a charm. The moment we got to thou shalt not commit adultery, I remembered where I left my bike." Now, if you find this funny, what is the idea here? The idea here is that there is something about a reminder that can actually change our morality. So the way we tested this was we went to UCLA and we asked 500 students to try and recall the 10 commandments. By the way, none of them could, and they remembered all kinds of commandments that don't really exist, but We asked them to try and recall the 10 commandments, and after that we tempted them to cheat in the same method I just described. What happened? Nobody cheated. It turns out that just reminding people about their own morality gets them not to cheat. In fact, even when we take self-declared atheists and we ask them to swear in the Bible and then we give them a chance to cheat, they don't cheat. So that means that this fudge factor, this ability to cheat a little bit and still feel good about ourselves, the moment we get to think about our own morality, shrinks down. The other side of the coin, of course, is that similar things can also get us to cheat more. And here too, I'll tell you a little joke. Johnny come back from school with a note from the teacher that said that little Johnny stole a pencil from the kid who was sitting next to him. And Johnny's father is furious. And Johnny, I'm so disappointed and humiliated. This is not how we raised you and educated you. You never, never, never steal a pencil from the kid who's sitting next to you. You're grounded for 3 weeks and just wait until your mother comes home. And beside Johnny, if you need a pencil, you know very well you can just say something. You can just ask because you know I can bring you dozens of pencils from work. If you find this amusing, what is amusing about it is that when you think about stealing a pencil from work, we think about it very differently than when we think about taking 10 cents from a petty cash box. That the moment the money, the object that we're stealing is multiple steps removed from money, we feel more comfortable. And it turns out that when we test this idea, we find that even being one step removed from money makes a difference. So again, go back to our experiment and imagine that instead of at the end you come to the experiment and said, I solve X problems, give me X dollars, you say, I solve X problems, give me X tokens. So you lie about tokens. And then you get the tokens, you walk 12 feet to the side and change them for dollars. These 12 seconds and cheating for something that is not money relieved people of their moral shackles. Our subjects double their cheating in that condition. And for me, that's perhaps the most disturbing thing about our results. It suggests that when you move one step removed from money, even for a few seconds, we cheat to a much higher degree and still think of ourselves as good people. So think about what happened when we moved to electronic transactions. What happened when we moved to things like stock options and derivatives? Are all of those things that are multiple steps from money, is one of their functions is that they allow people to behave more dishonestly, but still think of themselves as being very honest? And I think the answer is, very sadly, the answer is yes. And the odds are that as we invent new ways to think about money that are more removed from the physical notes, it's going to be just getting worse and worse.
Okay, Dan, I'll be sure to leave my pen at work today. I want to talk, we're talking about the criminal justice system, the justice system, and one theory that attempts to explain why we make irrational decisions is depletion theory. What is that?
Yeah, so depletion is very interesting. This is the idea that self-control is very hard. That as you go around the world, you're tempted by all kinds of things. We're tempted by donuts, and we're tempted by music and distraction on YouTube and Facebook. And this is eating at our ability to self-control. We basically get tired of doing that. So for example, if you take students and you ask some of them to remember a 10-digit number and some of them to remember a 3-digit number, and then you send them to another room, and they walk by a little tray that offers them either an apple or a chocolate cake. The people who had the 10 trying to remember the 10-digit number are more likely to go for the cake. They can't think too much, they can't control themselves, and they basically fail to temptation. The people who thought about the easy task of 3 digits basically have no problem and are much more likely to take the apple. So our temptation gets worse and worse and worse. You resist temptation, it eats at your ability. You resist temptation, it eats at your ability. This is why we fail so much in self-control at night. After we try to control ourselves all day long, you go out in the evening and there's a good chance you'll smoke, drink, do other things because you're basically tired of exercising self-control. You have no more resources to do it, so you fail for temptation. And the way this comes back to crime is in a recent paper that is kind of a really interesting analysis of saying, let's look at the decisions judges make over time about parole. Right? So what is the default? What is kind of the chocolate cake version of parole? What is the mindless decision? Is to basically allow this parolee to to get out.
Dan, just
right?
so you know,
That's
we're bringing up a
people.
graph of this right now.
Okay, so think about what happened in this graph. You basically see a high level of acceptance of positive outcomes in the beginning of the day. And then they go down and down and down and down. This is partially due to depletion. What happened is that as the decisions are taxing and difficult and complex, the odds of making kind of the relief decision is lower and lower, and people revert more to the default to say, I'm not releasing this person, we're not deviating from the status quo. So in the morning, there's a higher chance of deviation from the status quo and granting people parole. And as the decisions are taxing people, they become more and more tired, more and more unhappy, more and more difficult for them to think. They're basically more and more likely to not do anything different, to keep the status quo. Now, what's interesting in this result is that if people take a break, they eat, they drink, they take a break, it relieves to some degree their depletion problem, and they reset their ability. So, of course, if you ever go in front of a panel of judges, what these results suggest is you want to go first thing in the morning or at least after they eat. And if you can't control it, maybe you just want to bring a donut and something to drink for the judge so they can get to eat it just before they're going to think about your case. That's a very good advice for life, I think.
I will keep that in mind. More seriously, though, how would you recommend modifying parole hearings, other than bringing the judge a donut, to take the effects of depletion into consideration?
Yeah, so this is really the problem of trying to make the system efficient and getting people to make many, many decisions in one day. And I think we just have to understand how difficult this is. And the chances are that the decisions are made earlier in the day when people are fresh and not depleted are not going to be the same. So if you took this seriously, what you would do is you would not plan on such long days. What you would do is you would take your most important decision in society, and they could be about parole and they could be other decisions in the courtroom. Whatever your most important decision you would do, and you would do them first thing in the morning. And then as things become more and more difficult, you would more and more consuming, you would move to easier and easier decision. You could decide, for example, that you let people only sit for 2 or 3 hours about these decisions, not the whole day. But I think you would have to really understand the difficulty and the complexity and how much these decisions are taxing people as a way to create a recipe for how you make this decision. It's impossible. You know, I don't do parole decisions, but my equivalent is I grade papers, right? So my last undergrad class had 500 students in it. There is no chance that the last student got the same reading as the earlier student in terms of the grade. These things are really grinding on you. As you go through hours and hours of grading, in my case, so difficult decisions, they're grinding on you. So we have to understand this process, and we have to change how we look at things this way.
Dan, you know, another area where we might apply behavioral economics is in crime reduction. In the U.S., the crime rate in your country, though it's been going down for a long time, is still 2.5 times the average from 1962. So what lessons can we take from behavioral economics that we can apply to trying to reduce crime?
So, you know, it's a really interesting question of how you count crime, because crime, of course, you can count by people who are incarcerated, but you can also, if you look at Wall Street, there's a lot of crime for which people have not been incarcerated, right? So how do you count that exactly? So it's not just the numbers. The numbers are terrifying. I think that the American approach to crime has been to increase the size of punishment. They've taken this idea that criminals are kind of cost-benefit calculators, that they look at the gas station and they say, how much money is in there? What's the chance they'll catch me? How much time will I get in prison? Worth it or not? And because of that, we've been doing two things. We've increased police size and we've increased punishment intensity. So in California, for example, we have this thing called 3 strikes and you're out. You can steal 3 slices of pizza, one after the other. You get caught every time. You basically go to prison for life for this if you do 3 small things. And it's all based on the idea that people are actually doing the cost-benefit analysis. I think the reality is that people are not doing the cost-benefit analysis. This is not what's driving cost. Now, here is what happened, the kind of illusion. Imagine that one day, policy change, and they're starting to punish crime more harshly. What happened? On the next few days, people realize that it has changed, and they reduce crime. But over time, crime goes back to its pre-crime increasing policy level, And now people say, oh, I remember last time what happened. I increased the punishment. People stop crime, so let's do it again. So we make it harsher and harsher. And every time we get a temporary dip, but then it goes up to its natural, to its regular level, we're not really getting the system, and we're getting lots and lots and lots of people in prison. I think that instead of that, if we thought about how we rehabilitate people and how we teach people, how we educate them, how do we do crime prevention in the education system, not do crime prevention in terms of more police on the force. How do we get people to have different instinct about it? Look, the reality is that you and I have lots of chances to steal, rob, and get lots of financial benefit out of it, and we don't take it. This is the key. The key is how do we get more people not to take those opportunities, right? Instead, what we think about is we think about few bad people and how do we either incarcerate them or how do we kind of fix them in some important ways. The issue is how do you get people to think differently about their role in society, about what's right and wrong before they become criminals. And if we thought about it this way, I'm not sure we can reduce crime to zero. I don't think that's possible, but I think we could dramatically change what it is now, especially in the US. The last thought I think that is important is to talk about what's called the Gini coefficient, the income inequality in the US. You know, the US has a really high income inequality. It's kind of like China, higher than all of Europe and Canada. It's on par, kind of getting close to South America in terms of how much the wealthy have compared to how much the poor have. And that, of course, it's grinding at people because people see this tremendous wealth inequality, and it's very hard to feel that there's a society out there that we should feel connected to when we see the rich abusing the poor to such a high degree. So I think we need to think about education, and we need to think about income inequality as ways to do it.
Dan Ariely, thank you for a terrific and insightful week. I have to say, you give me a lot of fodder to bring up at dinner party conversations. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming on the agenda once again.
My pleasure, and I'm happy that after 4 days I can get out of this shirt.
Well, okay. Dan Ariely is a behavioral economist from Duke University and the author of Predictably Irrational and the Upside of Irrationality.